Down here in the valley, you know, dogwoods are native up to riparian areas in mountains, foothills, where it's a little cooler also. Got one right here. They can do well down here in the valley. It's been unusually hot, so you know they might like a little bit more water. They're pretty commonly used in landscape. This is with green leaf, red twig dogwood, but you see a lot of the variegated dogwood with the green and white leaf, which is a variegation of that native species. They like a little bit more water than a lot of like xeric native plants, and that's what I'll get into. On this side, we've got a lot of native plants that might like a little bit more water versus over here, things that are a lot more drought tolerant. There's a big range of that, but dogwoods will do fine down here in the valley with enough water.
Okay,
yeah.
We're gonna get started.
They're great, yeah. With flowers, and they produce berries. Flowers for bees and other pollinators, native bees, and then berries for birds. Yeah, not edible or not toxic necessarily, but you don't want to eat them yourself. Yeah. Live is working?
Yes, we're all good. Okay, thanks so much for working with us. Sorry about that delay. We are live streaming this, and it will get posted afterwards as well. So if you want to go back and take a look, double check some stuff, it'll be there for you. It'll be on YouTube. We'll post it on YouTube, yes. So like Christian mentioned, the first hour is mainly for our presentation, and then we'll have the last hour or last half hour for Q&A for however long you would like to stay with us. So this is Christian. I'll let him do his intro and we'll get going. If you need anything throughout, I'll just be right over here.
Hey again. My name is Christian. I mentioned before, I am part of the sales team and also do marketing here with Glover. So I help out with social media, classes, newsletter, other events and things. And then as part of the sales team, I help out people pick out plants, design their landscapes, find the right plants for their yards. And I came into the nursery business by way of just a love for plants in general, especially native plants. And that's why I talked to you about native plants today. I want to start out, and can you hear me in the back there all right? A little louder? Okay. All right. Is that a little better? I wanted to start by busting a few myths about native plants before we dive in. And one myth is that native plants don't need any supplemental water at all. You can just plant them in the ground and forget about them. And that is not true. So with native plants, there's a whole range of different kinds of plants from different parts of the state that require different water needs. Like I was mentioning, we've got plants up here that are native to higher elevations, maybe need a little bit more water. Plants over here that are native to drier parts of the state, don't need water. But even with dry plants, xeric plants, they're going to need more water early on to get established. So even with things like yuccas and agaves and cacti, they're going to need some water. You know, depending on the plant, how much water they'll need in the long term, but just know that not everything is just plant and forget it. There's going to be some water involved. Another myth is that native gardens are always have to be wild looking or chaotic. or that they are only a few plants surrounded by rocks, yucca and grasses and just, rocks. And that's not the case either. Native plants can fit into any kind of garden design, traditional garden design, from Japanese Zen gardens to cottage gardens to Mediterranean or modern style. And they can play around with other plants as well. They don't have to be, only native gardens. So you can mix and match your native plants with your traditional landscape. It doesn't have to be just one look. It can, fit into your style garden. And then the last myth, and this might be controversial, but a lot of people will tell you that growing native plants is easier than growing traditional landscaping plants. And I don't think that's necessarily true in all settings. That's not to say that in the long term you're going to use less resources, less water, less fertilizer on native plants, because they don't need fertilizer. They're generally accustomed to more local conditions. But there's still going to be upkeep. There's still going to be maintenance. There's still going to be some pruning, weeding. I'm constantly fighting back bindweed in my yard. That's taking over. So while native gardens are not necessarily, carefree, I do think they are, this is my opinion, but more rewarding in a lot of ways than native garden or than traditional landscapes. Um, you know, and they foster a greater connection with our, local ecosystems, our communities. I think it's really rewarding to be able to the mountains and go on hikes, or go down to the desert, national parks, and see plants that maybe you can grow in your own landscape. So there's a lot of rewards to um, growing plants, and then of course there's the benefits to our ecosystems, helping local pollinators and wildlife, helping conserve water, um, and all of that. So I think um, there's a lot of reasons to get into growing native plants, from purely practical to also just facilitating a greater connection with our environments. And that may encourage a different kind of gardening practice than you might be used to. That may get people out of their comfort zones a little bit from, traditional plants that we, have landscaped with for decades, your hydrangeas and roses and boxwoods and those kinds of things. Even though native plants have been here, around us for thousands of years, they might not be used in our landscapes in the same way. So there's a lot of trial and error that can go into it, a lot of experimentation. But I think that that's a very rewarding type of gardening. Um, there's work involved, but it'll bring you a lot of beauty, a lot of interest. And yeah, so jumping into different types of native plants. Utah is home to about 3,200, over 3,200 different native plant species. And just in comparison to other places, California, a big state, has about double that, about 6,500. Texas, about 5,000 native plant species. Florida, interestingly, about 3,200. And Washington State, the Pacific Northwest, with a lot of diversity, only about 2,300 native plants. So Utah is a real hotspot for plant diversity, competing with other regions. We've got a lot of plants to offer. 340 about are endemic to the state, meaning they only occur in the state of Utah and nowhere else. Penstemon is, you may have heard, a real great example of this. There are about 280 or so penstemon species. Here's a few here. Great flowering plants. 280 worldwide, and there are over 100 of those present in Utah, of any place in the world. So we're a hotspot for a lot of diversity of plants. And of those, 3,000 or so that are found in the wild, I was trying to calculate how many we do sell here. It's in the hundreds. I'm not sure exactly, probably 200 to 300 different kinds of plants, native plants that you can purchase just here for your yards. And there's more and more available all the time now that people are asking about them. So one reason for the great amount of diversity of plants is that Utah is made up of a lot of different ecoregions, different climates. I've got a map here. Probably can't see what's written on here, but there's 7 large types of ecoregions, and then that's further broken down into 37 smaller regions. And there's 3 big ones. There's the Wasatch and Uinta Mountains here, which kind of cut through the state. To the west is the Central or Great Basin, and then to the east, the Colorado Plateau. That's where all of our national parks are, Red Rock Country. And then there's a few kind of outliers. There's the corner of the Mojave Basin down by St. George, Washington County, where you can grow things like Joshua trees, a lot more desert plants. Right. A few other outliers are on the edges, but that contributes to the great diversity of plants. There's things that grow in mountains that grow anywhere else in the state. There's things that grow, in different desert areas. And we're here along the Wasatch Front. They call us that section is the moist Wasatch Front foot slopes. So that is where kind of the bulk of our human population lies. And there's a lot that you can grow in just that area. Yes. Yeah. I can pass this around if you want to take a look at that. Yeah, some plants are limited to very specific places. Endemic plants sometimes are very rare and limited to very small areas. Some plants, things like sagebrush and rabbit brush, can be present across a lot of the state, across different types of ecoregions. And that's where you can get into different species and subspecies of plants. There are numerous different species of sagebrush, for example. There's the big sage, then there's sand sagebrush, there's fringe sage, there's a number of different species, and then something like big sage, across these different ecoregions, you get into subspecies, so even more breakdown of different characteristics of plants. So we're along the Wasatch Front here in the valley, up to Ogden down to the south end of Utah County. Most of that area is hardiness zone 7A or B, kind of fluctuates. Hardiness zones are not the same as ecoregions. Ecoregions have a little bit more calculated into their makeup, but they're kind of related based on elevation and climate. So here in that little pocket of where most of us live, there's a lot that we can grow here. Our geography is dominated by, in the valley, we were the bed, or used to be Lake Bonneville, right? The Great Salt Lake is a remnant of that. So our soils down here are very heavily influenced by that old lake bed. That's why we have a lot of really dense clay soil that's really alkaline. That's not very rich in organic matter. That's why they say our clay soils are alkaline. There's not a history of like forests here in the valley that have, shed a lot of leaves and added a lot of organic back into the soil. That's why it can be a challenge to grow that kind of soil, but there are a lot of plants that are adapted to that and able to deal with that soil. Along the benches, were the shores of that lake, and in some of those areas in the foothills, you have more sandy soil, resulting from that lake bed, which is sort of the opposite texture of the clay, more fast draining, and you have issues with that as well. But factoring in all of that, we actually can grow a lot of different kinds of plants, here in our home landscapes. What was native to a lot of the valley, after the lake bed dried up, was a lot of grasses, and in riparian areas, along rivers, the Jordan River is where you see a lot more native trees and shrubs that took advantage of the water there, water that was runoff from mountains. But really, there's not a whole lot of specific native trees, shrubs, flowers native to where most of us live. So when we think about using native plants, we're kind of mixing the borders of our ecoregions, kind of taking plants from different places, well in tough conditions, bringing them to where they might not have historically been growing natively. But when you think about where we live, we're standing on asphalt, we have concrete, we have a lot of, a built environment that's also not very native. To support a human population, we do need to have a lot more trees, shrubs, a lot more shade that those provide to keep us cool, keep our homes cool. So we're kind of going off book when we talk about native plants. And that's why I'm a big advocate for planting responsibly, not always planting the most native thing that you can for your specific yard, but kind of planting what's going to be right for your purposes for shade or privacy, and using as many kind of regionally native plants that you can to do so, to help out in different ways, to help out native wildlife and pollinators. So when you think about native plants, you can think about what we can grow here, but also maybe what we should be growing here. And then I want to talk a little bit about availability of plants because plants come from such diverse ecoregions. They are used to growing in very specific conditions. Some of those plants, like I was saying, like sagebrush, can grow in a wide variety of ecoregions, soils, climates. They're easier to grow commercially because they're more adaptable. So there are a number of different kinds of plants that are available that are easy to grow, um, and you'll find a lot of them here. But then a lot of plants that people are searching for are hard to find, and you might have come across this where you're looking for that one wildflower that you see in the mountains. Paintbrush is one. Seagull lilies are flower. Utah juniper is another one that's really common around the foothills here. But some of these plants are really difficult to grow or mass produce essentially in situations like this. So there are certain plants that are more difficult to source, but as demand is increasing, growers both here locally and up in the Pacific Northwest, or California, where a lot of our plants come from, traditional plants. Growers are responding to that demand, experimenting with different soil mixes to grow plants that were never commercially available before. So you're starting to see that a lot more with certain plants, and hopefully there's just more and more available. Sometimes, if you're really set on certain things, there's different groups. Utah Native Plant Society, they have plant sales where they have seed swaps where people who are real nerds about native plants will grow some of these rarer plants, collect seeds, and then distribute those seeds. Then you get into growing them yourself, and that's where real experimentation comes in. But of what's commercially available, nice looking plants that you can take home with you and just get in the ground today, there are, like I said, hundreds now that are from trees and shrubs all the way down to grasses and perennials. There's so much available these days. Yeah, everyone across the country is really coming in on native plants, and we're doing our best to try and educate our staff and our customers about what native plants can do, what's available. Another thing to consider is that if you're searching online lists of native plants, you might come across something like a list of native plants that might be coming out of the East Coast or California or different parts of the country, where things are native there, but not necessarily native here. Not necessarily bad plants for our environment, but just might require different conditions. So just when you're doing research about plants, just kind of keep in mind what plants you're looking at, where they might be native to, if they're the right kind of plants for your situations. And now I'm going to jump into this handout that you have about native plant care. Maybe on time. And let's talk about, once you get started, what kind of plants to choose, how to plant them, how to take care of them. So the first step in gardening with native plants, number one, is knowing that you can mix and match your plants. You don't have to go all native. You know, if you have an existing landscape and you want to pop in some plants, we can find the right kinds of plants that can live with your existing landscape. If you're starting fresh, you'll want to pick plants that will work well together based on their site location and watering needs. If you have a spot that's really hot and sunny, you want to gravitate towards plants that can handle that. If you have a really shady location, you'll want to think about that, plants that can handle that, because like we were saying, there's plants that can handle all kinds of different conditions. But getting to know your site, your sun exposure, your soil, and then figuring out how you're going to water your plants is really the essential first step. Some plants are on the very xeric end and can handle no supplemental water once they do get established. Actually, if you flip over that page, we start talking about water. There's kind of a scale of water requirements from the high end. Your riparian plants that are up, at higher elevations and are used to more water, like things like aspens, things like dogwoods we were talking about earlier, who are generally used to more water. Things that are riparian or to a lot more water sometimes can actually adapt to lower water usage, like dogwoods. Things like spruces, like blue spruce, that are more native to cooler climates, higher elevations. You'll see down here in the valley um, getting a lot less water than they would normally. They would prefer more regular water, but they are generally tolerant of more sun exposure down here in the hotter temperatures, whereas things like aspens generally struggle pretty heavily in our hot climate down here. We tend to have shorter lifespans, get stressed out a lot more. We do see them around quite a bit, but they'll struggle with hotter temperatures, less water. Same with alpine firs or subalpine firs. They were really common for quite a long time down here in the valley, but you don't see many of them because they've really struggled. Most all have kind of died out that were planted down here. So getting to know water requirements for different plants can be tricky. It can kind of come down to individual plants. You might have to do some research on that specific plant you're looking at, whether it needs a lot more water or whether it needs very little water, or whether it can handle kind of biweekly watering, or can adapt to fluctuations. And that's something to think about when you're setting up your irrigation systems. What you want to group together. If you're doing drip irrigation on the same line, you want to have your like water needs plants together. Another thing that kind of goes hand in hand with watering requirements is your soil, because how your water moves through your soil and how it's available to your plants is also something you want to be thinking about. If you have really dense clay soil that holds onto water a lot more, really compacted clay soil, there are a lot of plants that can handle that soil, but there are also plants that really don't like really compacted clay soil. And when you get into the lower water end, some things can handle that clay soil. They'll put up deep tap roots, things like gamble oak trees, a lot of your grasses, junipers generally can really do just fine in that really compacted soil. But then there's a lot of plants, a lot of maybe more desert kind of plants that need more drainage. You know, they're used to growing in really rocky soils, growing in the sides of rock faces where there's almost no soil. So nowadays growers are responding to that, and there should be all this information on plant tags, or if you research plants, you'll see tags like, can handle compacted clay soil or need sharp drainage. That's where you'll get into amending your soil to kind of fit those needs, because oftentimes most of us probably have clay soil. We do get people from outlying areas with sandy soils, or if you're up in higher elevation places, Park City, Heber, where there is a bit more organic material in the soil. It's a little bit looser than our compacted clay. So you want to think about that when you're planting things together. Amending clay soil, you would do just like you would with your traditional plants generally. We recommend things like soil building conditioner or compost, or composted mulch to mix that in to loosen up the soil. We sell things like this ground breaker, which really works to help break up clay soils. We also sell Utilite, which is a locally sourced expanded shale. So it's like a fire treated rock, fine rock that you can mix in to help add some drainage for plants that need a bit more faster draining soil. Biochar is something that's becoming more popular. It's a kind of a charcoal-like product that you can also mix in. We sell it. This is a local company that makes it. We sell it in small amounts, but it's becoming more available in larger amounts, like mulches or composts that you can mix in with your soil to help with drainage, also add some nutrients into the soil. You might be familiar with this product here if you've bought trees and shrubs with us. This is call it Mike. It's a mycorrhizal fungus, fungal spore that can naturally occur in soils, but this is something that you would use when you plant to attach to the spores attach to roots and kind of build this system that helps pull in nutrients and water for plants, helps them build really strong root systems. And that can work on our native plants just the same. It's not a fertilizer, so it's not boosting any of that green growth, but just establishing root systems, which tends to be a slower process, especially in our clay soils with how dry our climate is, how harsh our winters are or used to be. So that can help also. Because establishing is a little bit trickier here. Also, can take plants, especially larger plants like trees and shrubs, a couple of years, even up to 5 years sometimes, to like really establish a healthy root system, to be at a point where you can really lower your establishment watering, and wean plants off of supplemental watering altogether. But that is also something to kind of consider when you're getting started with how much you're watering your plants initially versus how much you are going to be watering them once they really get established. Those factors, the soil texture, soil conditions, and how much you're watering are going to play with that. Soil chemistry is less of a factor for many of the native plants that you will find commercially available. Most of our available plants are generally tolerant of our alkaline soils. So you may have heard that Utah soils are generally pretty alkaline, and that goes, that's on the opposite spectrum of acidic soils, and that goes back into our history of, especially down here, being that lake bed, less forested organic material breaking down and adding back into the soil. That's what gives us our alkaline nature. Most of our plants available are pretty tolerant of that. Occasionally, there are a few plants that do appreciate more acidic soil, and generally those are plants that are more in the higher elevation kind of riparian side, are spruces and firs, aspens, dogwoods, things can tolerate alkaline soil, but do appreciate maybe an acidic soil amendment early on, and then mulch regularly that will help break down and add that more organic material back into the soil. So that's something to consider too when you're thinking about mulch. A lot of plants would appreciate that organic mulch, bark mulch, that will help break down, add more organic material. Plants that like that sharp drainage, that are more used to desert environments, might handle rock mulch just fine. But in all cases, I would steer away from landscape fabric and weed barrier. It's generally not worth the trouble of rolling that out anymore. Weeds just kind of grow through it over time. A better barrier when you're working around plants is just a couple layers of cardboard and then mulch on top that then just breaks down into the soil again, prevents weeds. But like I said before, weeds will be a problem with your native plants as well. And there's some maintenance that will go into that. Yeah, so like I've been saying, we kind of have these two sides here. There's so many different factors that go into what plants are native to, but we've kind of grouped them generally into the more higher elevation riparian side, more drought tolerant, but with different watering schemes, you can sort of mix and match as long as you're getting the right water to different places. But just to show off some plants, like I was saying, blue spruces you see very commonly down here in the valley. Another great evergreen. We didn't have any small ones. We've got some pretty large ones in the back. Is a white fir, which you see up in the mountains quite a lot, alongside subalpine firs. If you're trying to distinguish them, you'll see the subalpine firs are a bit more green, dark green color, and the white firs are a kind of lighter silvery color needle. Those actually do really well in the valley with a lot less water. Those are a nice evergreen. This here is a limber pine. They're native to higher elevations, usually more green in the wild, but there's a lot of cultivars that have a bluish cast to the needles, really quite attractive. Nice medium-sized evergreens that can do really well, like in the place of a blue spruce, something a little different. This here is an Engelmann spruce. It's a cultivar called Bush's Lace. Engelmann spruce are also native conifers, and this one is a weeping cultivar. So if you're familiar with the weeping white spruce, that's the tall, narrow evergreen that kind of has that candle wax shape to it, where it's really skinny, but kind of drapes down, good for narrow spots. The Engelmann spruce is quite similar to that, but will be a native plant. It's a little bit wider and bushier, but still a nice evergreen for landscapes. Behind it here, this tall tree is a big tooth maple. They are one of our native maples. You'll see them in the foothills. That's what gives the foothills the great color, reddish orange in the fall. There's three maple trees that are native: the big tooth maple, the Rocky Mountain maple, and our box elder is actually a maple tree in the same genus. There are cultivars of big tooth maples that are grafted onto sugar maple rootstock. That's what this is, the Rocky Mountain Glow maple, they call it. Those are a little tricky because they like a little bit more acidic soil, but they're still a really popular tree. When they're grafted like that, they can have a nice straight trunk, good for park strips. They're a smaller tree that's maybe 20 to 30 feet tall. In the mountains, you'll see them a lot more shrubby, and we sell them seed grown where they're more multi-stem shrubby, um, might handle the clay soil a little bit better because they're not grafted like that. Um, you're up hiking, this potentia is this yellow flower plant, and it's very common in traditional landscapes, but it is also a native here. Native higher elevations, but also can adapt really well to really hot, sunny sites with less water once it gets established. Um, and it'll bloom all season from spring to fall. There's potentia. There's yellow, white, pink, and orange flower varieties. I have back here a serviceberry, which is another favorite of mine. You see up in the foothills, there's a few different species of serviceberry that are native to Utah. They produce edible berries, kind of like a blueberry, but a little less tart. Birds love them, so you kind of have to get them right away once they ripen up. They can be multi-stem shrubs like this, large shrubs, or there are a few cultivars that are hybrids that are single trunk trees. If you want a nice small flowering tree, that's a good option. Over on this side, we've got some different fun things. Some junipers. This is a Rocky Mountain juniper that you see in the foothills alongside our Utah juniper. The Rocky Mountain juniper is a lot more commonly available. And then there are also a lot of cultivars. I don't know if you could see me on the stream, but you'll see that this one is very green. They've selected different variations that are a lot more blue. And you'll see these often used as privacy screens. A lot of these varieties like Skyrocket, Blue Arrow are very narrow, so you can use them in really narrow spots. So they can fit certain functions in your yard, not just, big, large things. You can make hedges out of them. Let's see, what else? Three-leaf sumac is another plant that you're seeing a lot more of these days. Really tough and really adaptable. You see these a lot in new developments, new parking lot, medians, that kind of thing. They'll get kind of wide, not maybe about 2 or 3 feet tall, but they can be hedged really nicely. So they can be kind of cut into nice shapes, nice little gumdrops, sort of like boxwoods. They lose their leaves, but just a really nice, easy care kind of plant. Really great fall color. Really good for native pollinators as well. Let's see, there's some other fun stuff here. This is a dwarf conifer. It is a bristlecone pine. So this is something that can kind of take the place of an Alberta spruce, which is those small kind of Christmas tree types of plants. Look like gumdrops. They're really popular landscaping plants, but this one will take a lot less water, and it grows fairly slowly, but just a nice shape. Nice addition to, like, as an accent in the landscape. We have here fern bush. This is one of my favorites. It is a flowering shrub, has this kind of ferny leaf texture. Can get quite large, 5 feet wide and maybe 4 feet tall, but can also be kind of pruned to be more manageable. Bees really love it when it flowers, these kind of white flowers. But they're not quite as large, but almost like a hydrangea flower kind of look. Definitely smaller flowers, but kind of have that same shape, that same color. Penstemons, we get in a lot of different kinds of penstemons, dozens that you can have in your yard. This is one of my favorites, Palmer's penstemon, and it's a large, 4 foot high, almost like a small shrub. These nice silvery leaves, gets these really great pink flowers. That's one of my favorites. I could go on and on about plants, but let's see. I covered everything. Yeah, I think I've kind of gone over everything that I had in mind to talk about. And yeah, we're about an hour in. So
Perfect. All right. Well, that's really great.
We can wrap up and then start some questions. So
all right. Well, thank you so
much.
Thanks
for sticking with me.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming out.
So real quick, just for our live, if anybody has any questions, always feel free to contact our diagnostics and check out our classes coming up. And then we're going to move into our Q&A section.